Welcome to the Charlie Paparelli Show. I'm Charlie Paparelli. I've been an angel investor for over 30 years. And during that time, I have met many entrepreneurs, and they have taught me how to start companies from scratch and how to build them into valuable enterprises. And I have someone today that we're going to be talking to, and Mike Dickerson, who's been through all the phases from startup all the way to turnarounds in this early stage market space. So it's going to be exciting. But before we get started, I'll ask you if you don't want to miss an episode of this. They come out, used to come out every Friday. I've missed a couple of Fridays now, but these interviews come out on Friday, and you'll be alerted if you would go to paparelli.com and submit your email. As a bonus, you'll get my blogs, which come out on every Tuesday and sometimes on Fridays. So I'd look forward to having you as a follower and a subscriber and being part of this tribe. Let me introduce Mike Dickerson. Like I said, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Mike. Mike is the CEO currently of ClickDimensions. We'll find out more about that later. He's also the founder and CEO of Vocalocity. He founded it in 2001 and sold it in 2006. He has been an executive, the longest part of his career, 10 years, executive with PGI, which is a private equity holding company specializing in telecommunications. And if I got that wrong, I'm sure Mike will correct me. He's a graduate of Stanford, including his undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. I met Mike, oddly enough, at the Advanced Technology Development Center at Georgia Tech at a Bible study I had just started. And Mike was one of like 15 people that showed up. And it was there that I had this great first impression. I fell in love with Mike because he's one of these guys, he's smart, he was honest as all get out, which helped the Bible study, that kickoff of that Bible study immensely because he shared so honestly. He's obviously was confident, but he's also a continuous learner. And you guys that follow me know I love those kind of people. Mike's reputation in the community, whenever I brought up Mike, is he's brilliant and he's likable. Everybody likes Mike, and he's focused. He's a focused executive who really has been in and around startups for his whole career. He's a lifelong general manager, and he is a lifelong general manager who has achieved results. So our topic today is building value through execution. So welcome, Mike, and thanks for sharing your experience with me and with my entire audience.
Charlie, it's great to be with you. It's great again, and just many happy memories of that Bible study and the relationships from that, and since then, and you're far too kind in your words, but much appreciated. Thank you.
Well, it's just who you are, my friend. So people just need to know you on the way in. You know, do you remember we haven't been in each other's orbit for quite a few years now? Tell me, I remember you called me, the way we got back together, you called me, something to do with a nonprofit founder. What was that about?
Yeah, so there's an organization called Promise 686, which is taken from a Bible verse that God sets the lonely to families. And it's an organization that was built around the problem of foster children started in the state of Georgia. And this is a great entrepreneurial story. And the basic thesis was this, is that these children are really unfortunate, and the things that happen to them and the experiences they go through their early years ultimately cripple them, if you will, and set them on a course for an entire life that is tough and often very unpleasant. And the basic observation was that there are about 13,000 children in the foster care system in Georgia, and there are about 13,000 churches in Georgia. And the idea was, if each church could adopt a foster child, you could solve this problem. And I was introduced to...
That's a pretty compelling idea. Very clear, very practical, right?
It is, and I'll just take a couple more adds to it. I was introduced to the CEO of that organization, Andy Cook, who is a fantastic entrepreneur. by David Guthrie, a guy that you know well. As Andy sort of went through what they had figured out about the foster care system, about being a foster parent, about being an adoptive parent. Andy, by the way, has 10 children in his house.
Oh
Five of
my
them are
God.
adopted.
All foster
Andy's
children?
five are adopted, and I believe maybe it's maybe I may have that off by one. And he's the CEO. So if you
I
guys
don't want
think
to
you've got,
interview him. I want to interview his wife.
yeah, well, they are a heck of a team, and the
Yeah.
way they run things is pretty amazing. It really is. But
Well, you know, one
what
thing that, go ahead. I'm sorry.
one thing that their thesis was that if you put a community around the family that was the foster family, that the chances of success were much better. Somebody, people who could help spell the family for date nights, who could help cook dinners, who could do those other things. And that all sounded good and a nice thesis. But Charlie, this is the thing that really caught me. Over 80% of the people incarcerated in the United States have gone through the foster care system. And I thought, wow,
What
if we
percent?
80.
Wow.
Yeah. So I thought, if you go back up the chain, the process chain, if you could make a difference in the foster care system, wow, you could really make a difference in society. And here was an example of a faith-based organization that also was working with government and DFACs in a way that wasn't adversarial and was delivering real results. And there's a great story, and maybe one day you'll have Andy on your program and hear how he's expanded from Georgia to I think it's 26 states right now. It's a fantastic story. But that's how we reconnected.
I think it would be a great story. One of the things that you did do is you told me that you wanted me to talk to Andy. And
Yeah.
and by the way, I'm only seeing a part of your face now. You've kind of moved off the screen.
This
Go
way?
that way.
Is this
Yeah,
better?
now you're in the middle. Okay. But when I was thinking about our interview from time to time as we were preparing for it, I said, "Did I ever talk to Andy? Did I ever close the loop on this guy?"
Not yet. The ball's in my court on that.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Oh, thank God. I mean, I do things. I'm like, oh, I said I would do it, and then I didn't do it. Okay, and here I am getting 2 hours of your time to help me out. So I do want to connect with Andy. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
All right, ball's in your court. One of the things I saw, and I bring this up first, because on your LinkedIn profile, you talk about what you've done, in your summary statement, particularly this large piece on ClickDimensions, okay, which you want to make sure that anybody who's interested in automated marketing, they need to call you, okay? And I hope they do, and we'll learn more about ClickDimensions in a moment. But you then end your little narrative that you have there before you get into your curricula is your interest in nonprofits. And you actually itemize, you say there's these 3 types of nonprofits I'm interested in. Where did all that come from? You don't see that on anybody's profile.
Yeah, I think it came from probably a couple of things. Probably most my stepfather, who's a fantastic guy named John Whitehead, who is what used to be the typical, or not the typical, but the kind of ideal American story. A guy who grew up during the Depression with family that didn't have much. He, great story, made his way to college by working at a carnival on Staten Island, guessing people's weights. And that's how he earned his money to go to Haverford College. And then World War II came out, and he left to go join the Navy, and through a long series of events, ended up in the first wave at D-Day in Omaha Beach on D-Day. Then he was in Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And so
no way.
That, yeah, amazing stories.
You went from Europe to the Pacific?
Asia. Yeah.
I never heard of one. I don't. There must have been many of them, but I never met anybody or heard about anybody that did that.
USS Thomas Jefferson, and there's a bit on him in Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation. he went on from that to ultimately become a senior partner at Goldman Sachs, and he retired at the top of at the pinnacle of that early. And everybody, was sort of like, "What are you doing? You're at the top of the game,
You
and
mean
you're
like
retired."
45 years old kind of thing?
Uh, I guess mid 50s, and he said,
That's
"Look,
where he's really milking it. That's where the big money comes in with less effort.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
by the way, back then, Goldman was a partnership, not public, and they were very focused on culture. And he was a
Uh-huh.
big part of that. And he said, "Look, I've done well enough. It's time for me to give back to the country that I did." And so, service, which started in World War II, led to service in government, service in philanthropy. And he obviously was a business person. He ultimately started several. Schools within business schools
Yeah.
on management of nonprofits. One at Harvard, I think the one at Berkeley is named after him. There's one at Seton Hall, and so that sort of culture of of service and giving was was something that I
Well,
looked
how
up
did
and said,
that wash
"Wow."
back? How did that wash over you? A lot of times what we do is we see our parents and they do what they do, and it's like, I don't want to do that. I want to do name it, right?
Ye-
But there was something with him that it captured you. Here you
ye-
are, his age,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what he was back then, and you're kind of falling into the same situation, same interests, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it is interesting because I look back to things that some things that I do that my parents did, and some things that I grew up in Washington D.C., as my sister calls it, the district of corruption, and I went as far away from D.C. as I possibly could. I have a brother who went into journalism, and that he went the other way, but so having said all of that, there were some things that my stepdad did that I looked up and said, you know what? He wasn't perfect. He made many mistakes, but this was a good thing. And I thought, it all gets into, sort of some personal things about a sense of purpose and why am I here?
But why
And
did you
trying to
think?
then
But you said it was a good thing. You said, why did you conclude it was a good thing?
Um,
It's
because I saw somebody who was using his talents to help others
okay.
and using his experience to help others. So at the highest level. And then, I thought, okay, well, rather than just be generic about it, let me pick 3 areas of focus that I can develop. I can take what talents I have and develop some relationships, domain expertise, and so on to
When
make
did
more
this
of a
come? But
contribution
before
there.
we get to that, I just want to ask one question before we
Sure.
leave your stepdad, and that
Yeah.
because it's still interesting is when he was mid 50s. How
Yeah.
old were you then?
So he and my mother were not married. Yeah, they were. So I was 21.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, you
I
were
was about 21.
okay. So and you were at Stanford probably still.
Yeah, yeah, I was
So
just
you're a
getting out of
smart
Stanford.
guy. You were thinking about this. You knew what your father was doing occupationally. You were old enough for that. Okay. And so here he is, top of his game, Goldman Sachs. And he talked to you and told you what he was going to do. He was going to leave Goldman. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, there wasn't a conversation. He just did it.
No, I know
And,
he did it, but I remember when he told you that he did it, okay, or was going to do it. Do you remember any part of that conversation? Because that would be interesting. Were you the oldest son?
yes, he had been married before he married my mother, and he has an older son and a daughter who are good friends and great people. And I think they're
So you were his sort of baby at the time?
I have a younger brother. I have a younger brher, and
Oh,
all of the
okay.
stuff about the
Well, good.
D-Day and
So you were in
mil-
effect the oldest. You were the oldest, right?
oldest
You know,
in the
in
house,
the
but
household.
the stories about his military career, no, this just was his way. He was humble. He never talked about anything.
Uh,
All of those things that I heard and a few others came up one day when my younger brother was freshman in college and waxing about the injustice of the first Gulf War and all
oh
the
my
financial
God!
interests. And
I can't imagine
my
that.
stepdad
He
he
got lit
never
up,
said,
huh?
yeah, he didn't get lit up. He just sort of said, when I was your age,
Mm.
this is what I was doing, and we were landing on D-Day. And my brother, who's a fantastic and probably one of the best humans you'll ever know, but he was a 19-year-old at the time. He went kind of like this, and we were just like, oh. And he didn't do it in a demeaning way. He didn't didn't do it in a braggadocious way, but that was just John's way. He did, yeah.
So
So
then what? So when he talked to you, do you remember the conversation that you had with him when he did make that decision to leave
he didn't.
Goldman?
Yeah, he didn't talk about it. He
Just did it.
just did it, just did it, and he didn't talk about this is
Well, what about your
unlike
mom?
me.
Did your mom say, the old man's crazy? What the hell happened? He was making so much money. Now he's going to be nothing here. What's going on? I used to tell
No,
all my friends in the neighborhood, my,
yeah,
my husband's a
no,
partner with Goldman. Now what
yeah,
do I tell them?
yeah, no. He was, my mom had her own career, so she was she was and she was a TV journalist, and very often when they would go out, people would recognize her and not him, and so that was always funny. Anyway, they were a great match. They were a great match.
That's like when I go to my church. Kathy's she's been involved with the church since we both came to Christ around 40. And she's sort of become older. So she's now one of the leaders in the women's ministry. She's
Yeah,
involved with Stephen Ministry. So when I go to church, I'm on her arm, and she's
yeah,
like the mayor, right? Oh, Kathy,
yeah,
Kathy, Kathy, I used to take her to all this Technology Association of Georgia stuff, and she used to hate it because everybody knew me, nobody knew her. And now
yeah,
the shoe is on the other foot for sure. So
yeah.
that's funny how
Yes,
your father was this
yep,
successful guy that no one cared about.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
All right, so let's go, but talk a little bit more about your childhood there. That was kind of interesting. So you grew up in Washington D.C.
Yeah, hey, Charlie, it's embarrassing to talk about because it is such an amazing and blessed story. If you've ever seen the movie Forrest Gump or Zelig, I mean, there's some combination of that. My parents, one grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, one grew up in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, from lower middle class uh, families, and
Which was which, by the way?
what's that?
So
Which
who came from Roanoke?
my father came from Roanoke.
Okay, and your mother's
Um,
from Wisconsin. Okay,
yeah, and
but from middle class roots.
yeah, yes, and lower middle class roots, and they were
So their
very
fathers were probably tradesmen, in effect, right?
yeah.
Okay.
One was a druggist in a pharmacy, and the other was an architect.
Oh, so they were
And
professionals then. Yeah, they weren't blue collar workers.
a drugstore in Roanoke, Virginia. I'm the first Dickerson male to graduate from college.
Oh, okay, all right.
So if that gives you anything, but my mother was the first CBS's first TV journalist. She worked her way up from being a secretary to being a whatever, and became when Kennedy and Johnson were president, she was the White House correspondent for NBC when Dan Rather was
Wow.
CBS. So she was kind of a big deal.
What was her TV name?
Nancy Dickerson.
Nancy Dickerson. I gotta
Yeah,
look her up. She's got to be in
yeah.
Wikipedia.
She is, and there's a couple books. She wrote a book. There's a couple. My brother wrote a book about her. Yeah, she was kind of sort of a big deal. So like I'd say it was and my biological father was an entrepreneur. Like I say, he never graduated from college. The war came up and never finished. But my childhood was full of amazing events. I mean, I think was in the Oval Office when I was 3 years old. I met TV stars, football
Who
stars,
was the president
movie
at that
stars.
time? Was it Johnson?
Johnson was president. Yeah,
So you went into
yeah.
you met Johnson. You must have come up to his knee.
Not yeah, barely. And there's a yeah. This is
You don't remember
probably
though, right?
yeah, a little bit. back then, taking a kid to the White House or to Congress. I mean, I can remember riding the subways underneath Congress. There's a thing that connects the buildings, and going on the floor and all of this. It was no big deal. Now you have gates that are, walls and all of this stuff. So when all of the business on January 6th happened, I was like, wow, that's where I, used to go. When my mom was working, I'd get dragged along. So anyway, it was really a pretty pretty amazing.
What was the conversation? What was the conversation like? First of all, did you guys ever have dinner together? Two professionals, Goldman and on TV. I can't imagine. Did you ever see mom or dad?
Yeah. So my biological parents were married until just before I went to Stanford, and then they were divorced. And my stepfather, who's the one was Goldman, was after. So my biological father was an entrepreneur.
But you were but your biological father and mother, you lived in D.C. at the time.
Yeah.
Oh, you did. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So you didn't have divorce as a child. You were gotten to young adult at that point.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
How long was it before when your mother got divorced and she kind of remarried? Yeah.
Yeah. My parents had been sort of separated for a while, and then she started dating and being serious with John Whitehead, and that went for several years, and they were ultimately married. So between, there was a 5-year period or so there.
I always wonder, so you were more like 16, 17 when the troubles happened between your biological parents.
Yeah, probably 14, 15, 16. There were a couple of years that
affected you. I mean, you're in your high school years. You're starting to look towards college at that time.
Yeah, it definitely did. And it certainly formed some of my thoughts about what to do as a father, what to do as a parent. And I've obviously made plenty of mistakes. I think maybe different mistakes. And I'm sure my kids can tell you they have a long list of the mistakes that I make every day.
Don't worry. Their kids will have a long list of their mistakes too. Okay. That's just the way life is. All right. Right now they think they're right.
Yeah, that's true, and they may be, but it was.
You're too kind.
It definitely had an impact, and
What was it? What was the impact?
The idea of family dinners and the importance of those. You bring that up. Yeah, my growing up, my parents were, that's part of the Washington scene. I mean, my mom's book was titled Among Those Present, and it was very much part of the way that you got access. It was a different world back then. There wasn't cable TV. Politicians didn't want to be on TV back then. And so going to social engagements at, the British Embassy or whatever, that was the social was part of the job. And I think that's still the way to a little bit.
And it was high contact.
Yeah, high contact.
Right.
Yeah. So my parents were out, an awful lot. And
what did your dad do? You said he was an entrepreneur, but what was he?
So, I mean, he ranged from real estate development to restaurants to, brokering trade deals with Japanese to stuff in Saudi Arabia. I mean, he was all over, a true entrepreneur. Let's find something.
But he always figured out a way to make money. He's one of those guys. I had one guy tell me that I interviewed. I thought it was great. He's a sales guy, and he's an entrepreneur. And he said to me, he said, "Yeah, dog will go away." He said, I said, what did it mean to be a lifelong sales guy like you? He said, Charlie, he was he had high humility until he made this statement. He says, let me just tell you, if you drop me in the middle of New York City and I had nothing in my pockets, he said, in 5 years, I'd be a millionaire. That's what he told me. He says, I'm not worried about finding a way to make money. That was his whole thing. And it sounds like your dad was that way.
My dad, it's a great point. My dad was, and he he made a lot of money. He lost a lot of money. He made a lot of money. He lost a lot of money. My brother used to say you could tell how our dad was doing by what car was in the driveway, and they ranged. And they ranged from all the gamut. But Charlie, and my dad, in his last, let's say 15 years of life, which were, he lived to be 92,
Wow.
and he had some difficulty his last, probably at least 15 years, and he ended up, dying with no money. And lived his last 15 years with no money. And he said that very same thing. He said, I always could make money. I always thought I could always make money.
Yeah.
And even till his last years, he was still trying to do deals and whatever. Just
So was he somebody that when as you watched your dad as you grew up and you watched him, was he somebody that had the capability to make money and was always betting on something that was going to be even bigger, and that's how he lost his money? Or did he just lose his money because he just spent himself into poverty, in effect?
So it was probably a combination of those things, but also alcoholism. I know something
near and dear to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And exactly. A lot of families with entrepreneurs, by the way.
Yeah, and so if you take that, and then he owned restaurants and a nightclub that was sort of like a power scene. Yeah, exactly. So you're the center of attention in that place, and the whole job back then, lobbyists could pay to take senators and their girlfriends out and ply them with drinks and entertainment, and my dad's nightclub was right in the center of Washington, D.C.
And that's where they walk in and they say, why don't you have a drink with us? Have a drink with us, And he's sitting there and he's meeting these people, but he's always drinking. It's really horrible to be an alcoholic in that environment, for sure.
Yeah, 15 scotches a day was a kind of a standard day for him. Yeah.
But he would, but he also would, he was one of these that wanted to bet on the next biggest deal, right?
And he had parlayed and done from somebody that had no money, no college, hadn't graduated from college. He had parlayed his wits and his charm and his he was very, very smart, and had been able to parlay into a very substantial amount of money. And then he had a bad situation and ended up losing it all, basically. Had a public company that ended up having some very serious accounting issues, and he ultimately was exonerated, but his CFO and head of finance were.
But think about this, is you talk about how smart he is, and he had to be a really smart guy. You're a really smart guy, okay? Obviously, you went to Stanford. You're a smart guy. You had high academic achievements. How could we be so smart yet keep falling into the same hole? Is that crazy?
The definition of crazy, yeah, and I think that
definition of crazy. Yeah, but I see it. I see it in myself that I have to guard against some of these things.
How do you guard against it? I'll tell you what I try and do, and I'm not sure, and I'm interested, because you're right. It's that's something to if you could solve that problem, that would be a good thing. How do you guard against it?
I think I think we all have. There's a piece of us, okay, that is like that. All right, especially sort of high achiever type folks, if you will, and so. I've seen in others, I'll answer in others, that I've seen it to the extent of your father, where they always were sort of betting on the come. And if they spent money, it was always, what's the big deal? I'll always make money, right? So there's never a chance that I ever see myself without money. And so one way is I kind of look at others and I see what they've done. We have a value system, and I'm reading a book on values right now with lawyers. It's kind of funny. This is a federal judge that I know, wrote a book on this called The Significant Lawyer, which I'm reading now, which is the best book I ever read, ever, on values, okay? And one of the things he points out is you develop your values as you're younger by watching people and how they operate, whether it be in business or law or whatever their profession, and say, I don't like this. I feel more comfortable with that, right? So I start following those people. So I try, one is I really try to hang around with people who have their heads screwed on straight. That's one way to protect
Yeah.
myself, okay?
Mm-hmm.
The second way is I go back to principles, okay? Like, Charlie, remember, there is no fast way to build sustainable wealth. All right? So don't just, now that doesn't mean I haven't written checks with zero due diligence in a conversation. One conversation, write a check for 50 grand, and 60 days later, it's gone. Okay. So I've still done that. It's not like, oh, I'm so careful. And no, I've got crazy in me. I always say the best time to approach an angel investor is right after he exits from a deal. Because, man, he has the Midas touch, baby.
Yeah, so smart.
Yeah. So I think that, but the first one I think is the most important, and which is, in other words, to hang around with the people that you admire, whose values you really do embrace, okay, or would like to embrace, and don't get sucked in with the fast crowd. Okay, look where your dad hung out.
Yeah, and
it's
so
all
that's
easy money, baby, and it's power, money, right? Fun. Glamour, all that. I mean, that is like impossible to hold on to money in that environment.
And it's interesting. So we talked about my biological father, who did many amazing things, but then, as you said, he made his money, he did great things, but ended up at the end of his life, having lost all his money. And my stepfather, who did some amazing things and gave a life of service, but he wasn't perfect either. He traded hours at the office for relationships with his biological children that he spent the last years of his life trying to repair. So my takeaway is, I think for me, is that the two fathers in my life both did amazing things and far above the bell curve in their own way.
Yeah.
But both were great in their own way, but neither of them was perfect. So for me, I take what was good that my biological father did, and I take what he didn't do well, and I use those as markers. And same thing for my stepfather, what he did well and what he maybe struggled to do well as a father that he had regrets for. So they're positives and the negatives. And you're right, those absolutely set me up.
Your father, John, it's John Whitehead?
That's my stepfather.
Your stepfather. I have such respect for a guy like that. So here he is. We get caught up in the crowd. I mean, he's working at Goldman. You talk about high achievers. He's just around it all, right? So you're around people who work 80-hour weeks and never go home. And it's normal. You are who you hang with. But at some point he said, these are not my values. And he, at the top of his game, quits and does something else. That's so unusual. I mean, I would have waited to say, well, I'm going to wait till I'm 62, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, now it's time. Yeah. He could imagine how fed up he was with living someone else's values.
Well, I don't know that he ever really lived someone else's values. It was, first of all, Goldman Sachs in the era up until the 1980s was a very different place. They, there was a no prima donna culture. It was very much about the partnership. It was about serving the clients. And if you get a moment, go look at Goldman Sachs's. There's a statement of 14 principles that my stepfather wrote in 1970 that said these things, and it was had things like wealth or reputation take a long time to develop, but of these things, reputation can be lost the fastest and is the hardest to gain back. And remember that you're always serving your clients. You could go look at these things, and they look like a Superman comic book from the 1940s. That was the America of apple pie and motherhood.
Well, he was part of the greatest generation where he was looking out for his friends' lives at 18 years old, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
we don't
And
have that experience today.
he grew up during the Depression. So his idea of an 80-hour work week was, this is what you should do because you might be poor and without food. This is what you should do
Right,
to
right.
provide for your family. That's a very different ethos. And so, when he would not be home for family dinners, as he would tell me about some of the regrets about raising his own kids, he said, this was my job. I needed to go meet with this client because there was business to be done, and I needed to do that to provide for my
Right.
family. That's very different than the Wall Street culture. And I was an investment banker for all of 1 year in the 80s. And then, I see it now. That culture is, I'm going to work 80 hours because I want to make more money, because I want to have more things. Very different situation. My stepfather was doing it
Yeah,
for
that
his
makes total
values.
sense. Yeah. How did you?
Yeah.
This question is
Yeah.
like way off the reservation here, okay? But I just always wondered this: how does somebody like your mom, Nancy, how does Nancy, who's in the middle of all of this on TV all the time as the White House correspondent, how do they meet someone new?
Well, they're
Especially
meeting people.
someone who's working at Goldman, who's not even in
Yeah.
the same, they're not in the same universe, okay? How
Yeah,
does that
absolutely.
happen?
So this is something that's unique to Washington D.C. Remember all of the so she's a journalist, and Washington D.C. There's the stuff that goes on during the day, and then there's the social activities at night, which
Okay.
bring people together. And there's a whole concept. There certainly used to be. I don't know how it is today, but there's so and so socialite is having a dinner party, and oh, there's an unmatched man. At the time, the unmatched men were William Webster, who was head of the FBI, Larry King, who was on somewhere between wife 4 and 7. There were a couple of other unattached men, and so someone would say, "Oh, well, I need you have to have equal number of men and women back in that time." And my mom was a single, eligible lady, and so she was always getting paired up with people. There were,
Who
and
did the pairing?
the British ambassador, this socialite, that. I mean, they're in
You mean
Washington.
pair them
There's
before they would come to the party?
no. They would say, "Oh, you're going to sit next to.
Oh,
You're
I
going to
got
sit
you. I
next to."
got you.
So
So the
there's
hosts of these really influential guest
yeah.
parties, okay, would be matchmakers.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
I would have never guessed that as an answer.
Oh yeah. Oh, totally. That's. I mean, that adds to the the entertainment value of the party and the energy of the event. And
So what
yeah,
was with all this going on, with all these people in your life?
yeah,
Okay, maybe tangentially. Okay, I mean they certainly weren't in your home. Maybe they were in your home.
yeah,
Okay, I don't know if Johnson showed up for a little
yeah.
Christmas gathering, at your house. He did.
Sometimes,
Sometimes you had that. Okay.
yeah.
So how did that, so what was life for you and your brother in the midst of
And as you
all
may
of
know,
those
my
powerful people,
yeah, and
with
as you
no
may, I
with
mean, and
names of which books have been written about? Okay.
yeah, and my brother, as you may know, is a journalist. He was host of Face the Nation for several years,
What's
and
his name?
John Dickerson,
John
and
Dickerson. Okay.
he was on 60 Minutes, and he's a pretty well-known sort of political correspondent and a fantastic historian. And he wrote a book called On Her Trail, which was about our growing up and his relationship with our mother. And it was very much of an not untypical, with a young boy and their mother, a lot of conflict, and but there was adversarial nature, and over
And he was
time,
the baby boy.
he's 5 years younger than I am, and
Yeah,
then
right.
he ultimately went into her field, and it's a great book, and it's an amazing story that ultimately comes to reconciliation at the end of it, just as my mom was just before she had the stroke that ultimately ended her life. But it's a great story. But what he tells is the sort of situation that, when we grew up with all of that, and there was a sort of an effort to be among those present, to be, who can I get to my party? Is this person of higher news value or social standing? And so that kind of grossed us out. We were like, hey, these people are all they're just regular people. And we got a little jaded. Like, okay, the president of the United States puts his pants on, or hopefully one day a skirt on one leg at a time. They're
Yeah.
just like other people.
Uh-huh.
And we really kind of got turned off by phonies and status seekers and that. And so, I
So
took
you could recognize them as soon as they walked in the door.
Oh God! And you see him, and you see now the
So
whole
you and
horrific
John
thing
like huddle in the corner and go, "Oh my God, what an idiot!" I mean, was that
oh,
what happened?
totally. But the other thing is, you would see the people who were also genuine and great. And I'll give you an example. On Reagan's last night as a private citizen, he came over to our house for dinner. Why? 'Cause my parents my dad had lived in California, and he invited a bunch of friends from California. He thought we were going to be in town for the inauguration. And my mom gets a call one day and says, hey, I hear there's a dinner party, and all of Mr. Reagan's friends are there, and he'd kind of like to come. And so you're like, oh, President of the United States wants to come to, okay,
This
great.
is the president-elect of the United States of America. Oh my gosh.
Right. So my point is this: Reagan shows up, and we had this little thing. My brother and I had to go greet people as they came in. This was one of the things my brother writes about. We were indentured servants, and Reagan comes up, and there are photos and all of that. Well, fast forward, Ronald Reagan, about to be the most powerful man in the world, comes over to me and says, hi Mike, I understand you play baseball. I was a broadcaster for the Chicago Cubs once. And he just starts talking to me about his experience as a broadcaster for the Chicago Cubs, how great baseball is, how much he loved it. This is the most powerful guy in the world.
How old were you at the time?
Other people all over the place. And he just...
How old were you?
I was 17.
17. Okay, good. You had to put this in perspective. That's good. Okay.
Yeah. So my point was, as a 17-year-old, you can realize, hey, here's a guy who's not a phony, who's not BS, and who actually cares about people. He didn't have to do that. And it wasn't contrived. It wasn't, oh, let me, go be the gracious big man and talk. It was just genuine as hell. And there are people like that, unfortunately today, and you hear about them. You hear about the people who are like, I'm out of here. I'm not doing the Washington scene anymore. Because there are too many, frankly, jackasses who are just, trying to raise money or shoot their mouth off instead of trying to actually do some good. And, we could see the people who were genuine. It's sad. And my brother will tell you this because he's doing it now. He's like, Mike, I can't tell you how exhausting it is to go and talk to these people who are all spinning and lying and out for their own good. And, so once upon a time, there were politicians who actually, cared about what they were doing and cared about the country. I think they're few and far between these days.
I've been reading, I've gotten interested in history and biographies. Okay. And I've been doing some of this. And what's interesting to me is, like the last book I read, it was on the chiefs of staffs. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's called Gatekeepers. Okay?
Yeah.
Excellent book. And it's it goes from Nixon, okay, all the way to Trump. Okay.
Yeah.
And you really do see, you think that everybody was, oh, they were all in it. And then I've read also about Grant and Lincoln, and I go way back, okay, all the way to the beginning of the 20th century, with Wilson and others, right? And Teddy Roosevelt. And what you see is that it's always been there. It's under a magnifying glass because we got 24/7 news cycles, okay? But man, you think, oh, it was all great back then, No, it wasn't great back then, And the newspapers would take a side, and they were hard on it. So we idealize the past, but It's just the same thing, but now just available to us. Okay.
I think that's true. There are a couple of things, and by the way, if you like Chris Whipple's book about the gatekeepers, um, my brother wrote a book called "The Hardest Job in the World." It
Okay.
came out last year, and it's about the American presidency. And the basic thesis is that the job was designed in 1776 in a certain way, and that it's unrealistic to expect people to be great at it, and everything that we do to hire somebody for that job is actually antithetical to the things that
Exactly.
make somebody good. But to your point, here's one of the stories is, do you know that I think it was in the about 1938, there was a complete uproar because Franklin Roosevelt wanted to increase the White House staff to 32. And this was like, oh my God, this is dictatorial overreach. 32. And there were fewer cabinet departments. Now you have, I think it's 500 in the White House staff alone, and the cabinet departments. I mean, so the job, if you go
Sounds
back,
like the university system.
yeah, there's a lot in common with that. Yeah. But if you go back to Eisenhower, where things started to really expand, it's a very different thing. Nixon had two secretaries who worked with him. His world was very different, Lincoln's world, than what Trump or Clinton or Bush or whatever. Very different.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. Let me just explore. I'm going to keep getting off the subject, but you make such great statements, and I have to ask the question. So you say now it's antithetical, choosing a president for the way we choose presidents for this most difficult job in the world? Is that what?
Yeah, the hardest job in the world.
Hardest job in the world. It's antithetical the way we do it now to getting the right person in there. You seem to have thought this through. So tell me what conclusions you've come to here.
Yeah. So if you think about, and I know the theme of today's talk was about execution. You think about what a great leader of people does in a large enterprise. And what they do is they're very good at picking people. They align people to a clear vision that they have formed together, and it's socialized all the way through. They spend time developing their team and making sure that their team develops their team. They have data and metrics to make sure that everything's operating well. They spend time with their customers, but they're also very humble because a lot of people have to, buy in to come work at that firm. Yeah. There's a set of things that you do that are hard work and hands-on. And humility is one of the level 5 leadership that Jim Collins talks about, right. Those type of things. To get elected, you need to be provocative. You need to be entertaining. There's a reason that we've gone from, a movie actor. And, Reagan once had a famous quote. He said, people said, what do you mean a TV star could be president? And he said, what do you mean? Who couldn't an actor? You have to be an actor to be president. And, I think Roosevelt once had a comment when he was with Orson Welles, and he said, sitting at this table is the greatest actor in America today. And there were just two of them. And he said, and it's not you. So it's not unreasonable that the way that we go to getting elected was from the greatest actor to Reagan to a reality TV star. It's who can be entertaining, who can be inspiring, and it's a marketing effort. Politics.
And look at the other piece that you talked about in your run-up is to say what great leaders have. They develop their teams, they work with them. You become president, and you have to then have this, and I got this from the gatekeepers, right? This instantaneous team. They just sort of like, whoop, these are the people that I need. It's like, these are the people that need to take over all of the major departments, and their leadership and strategy and execute, and a lot of them are actors, okay, because they came out of government. And the guys that aren't actors in a lot of cases, and we saw this in the Trump administration, that were really good guys, they were like, what are we doing here? I can't do this. And they would quit, So it's
I got
really, it's
two
crazy
stories for you.
system that we have to make this all sort of work.
Two stories for you.
It's sort of
One
like
is
doing a startup with the largest budget in the world. I mean, you'll never not have money, okay? So
you'll go from zero to a Fortune 50 company like that.
Yeah, right. And you've got 3 months to pull it together.
So there's a story about Mike Bloomberg, who obviously was a very successful entrepreneur and built a great business that's still a great business.
But by the way, a terrible actor.
Yeah, exactly. So Bloomberg was smart enough to know he could never get elected, but gosh, did he know how to make the city of New York run and run. And anyway, Bloomberg, when he was first elected, the press was hounding him about, what have you done in your first 100 days? What have you done in your first 100 days? And Bloomberg's answer was, I built my team. And they'd say, what do you mean? And he'd say, I built my team. And the point of this story, I'm copying from my brother who told me this, and he said, Bloomberg knew that getting that team right was the most important thing. And once he had the team that were the right people in the right places, then he could execute. So taking that and going back to Reagan, who, is just, and as we've talked about, I had some insight that, no normal human should get. And again, my lucky, lottery card, I got to hear some of the stories about how Reagan actually ran his administration. Think about this. He had George Shultz, who was the head of Bechtel, the largest construction company in the world. He had Al Haig, I'm in charge, who was the head of United Technologies. That's a 50,000, 100,000 person company. He had John Whitehead, my stepdad, who's head of Goldman Sachs. Don Regan, head of Merrill Lynch.
What did your dad do?
My stepdad, who was head of Goldman Sachs.
Was he in the administration?
Yeah, he was Deputy Secretary of State.
Okay.
Schultz. And that was when he went into service. He stopped, and then about a year later or whatever, Reagan called him up and said, "Hey, John, would you come to Washington?" And he knew George. So that was part of his.
But go ahead, keep going down the line of the people in his administration.
So Jim Baker, who was who was a great chief of staff, by the way, probably the best in the past.
That's what the book says. He is the stereotypical. That's who you want to be, Jim Baker, is if you're chief of staff, right?
Jim Baker was pretty fantastic. And I'm probably forgetting. Oh, he had not Wolfowitz. Who was the other? There was another guy whose name escapes me right now, a big neoconservative, famous neoconservative. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, he had all of these very powerful people who had big egos. And here's Reagan. But he had a way of managing them. And we don't have time for some of these small little anecdotes that I heard from my stepfather. He had a way of managing these people, that each one of these big named egos.
Give me an anecdote. Something came to mind when you said that.
I've got two.
Okay.
And I'll try and make them quick. The first is about decision making, and my stepfather, John Whitehead, was Deputy Secretary of State, and that meant when George Shultz, the Secretary of State, was out of the country, he became the acting Secretary of State. And one time early in Reagan's administration, there was a situation that arose. There was a former Dutch colony called Suriname that was going to have, there was some intelligence that there was going to be a Marxist revolution. And the Dutch government had called on us to say, can we borrow some of your C-130s to come take our troops so we can stop this Marxist revolution from happening? And so my stepdad is, now Secretary of State. He's got to figure out what we do. So he gets a team together and they create this 43-page document. And he goes into the Oval Office to, speak to Reagan. And Reagan says, "John, how are you?" He calms him down. And then he says, "Okay, tell me the situation." He doesn't read the 43 thing. He says, "Just give me the things." And he says, he had a set of questions. Is the existing government pro-democracy? Are they pro-capitalism? Are they this? And then he went through, this thing. The team, including my stepfather, had been. We have to give the Dutch these C-130s to let them go. But if they did, it had ramifications about the United States interfering in Latin America, and we had a history of doing that. It wasn't good. And anyway, he goes through all of this. And Reagan asked these series of 5 questions. And in the end, he says, "And John, what would happen if we did nothing for 24 hours and wait to see if this revolution, if this coup actually happens?" And he said, "Wow, that's brilliant, of course." So they waited 24 hours, nothing happened, and all was good. The point of the story is twofold. First, Reagan had a set of 5 questions, I think roughly, that he would ask. And every one of those people on that team knew, when you go into Reagan, answer these things and he'll get his head around it.
Those things, when you say those 5 things, those were his 5 core beliefs.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo. And exactly. And that's what a great leader does. So they had the 5 core beliefs and they knew how to answer them. Now, the funny part of the story is, as my stepfather, former head of Goldman Sachs, is leaving the Oval Office thinking, "Wow, that's so obvious. We should wait 24 hours. What a wise, gosh, this Reagan is so wise and so smart." As he's walking out, Reagan says, "By the way, John, where is Suriname?" But the point, he had great humor, and the other one, just because I know you can edit this out if you like, but there's another time. It seems like Schultz was out of the country when tough things were happening. The beginning of the Iran Contra scandal was happening. When I say the beginning, it had just been uncovered that the United States was selling guns to Iran to get money to fund the Contras in Nicaragua and undo the Sandinistas. And this was, in violation of some existing U.S. law. And this was the thread was it was literally day one when the thread was being pulled. And my stepfather gets summoned to testify in Congress. This is back when people actually took those things seriously. And so he shows up, and they ask him some questions, and some senator asks him, "Now, Mr. Whitehead, if..."
And this is closed door at this time, probably.
No.
Oh, it wasn't. Okay, so it's public.
And he said, "Mr. Whitehead, if the United States government had sold guns to get money to give to the Contras, would that be a good thing?" And my stepfather said, "Well, hypothetically, no, that wouldn't be a good thing." He, of course, didn't know who Oliver North was or anything else or any of that other stuff. So he goes home and he's in his apartment, and he had 1 drink max a day, and he's probably having his cocktail, loosened his tie, and the phone rings. "Mr. Whitehead, it's the White House. Mr. Reagan would like to see you." And so he goes over to the White House, and Reagan, "Oh, John," then they had a history for when John was at Goldman, of talking and sharing ideas. "John, it's so great that you've come down and joined the administration. I'm really grateful that you've done this service and whatever." And he goes, and it's just, and then he says, "John, I have a routine. I take a nap every day about this time, and I wake up and I watch the evening news. And I do it every day. I find that it keeps me, my mind active and fresh, and I'm recharged, and I can do my job." And he said, "Every day I do this, and I watch the news. And today I turned on the TV, and there's the time when you turn on the TV, this is back before the fancy TVs we have now, and you can hear the sound before the picture comes on." And what I heard was somebody saying, "If we did this, it would really be bad." And I thought, who would say such a thing? And then the picture came on. And it was you, John. It was you. And so what he did is he built the guy up, this guy who was pretty fancy pants to begin with, built him up, thanked him, and then he used humor to say, hey, look, weren't playing, you weren't running by the party line here. You messed up. Don't do it again. But he did it in a way with humor. And my stepdad, like all of these other, high-powered people, would run through brick walls for this guy because that's the way he managed them. He managed them with core values. He managed them with humility and with a little bit of humor. But he was on it. He was on it.
Yeah, but it was it was handled with humor, but it was absolute truth. Yeah, I was saying when you explained it like that, I was sitting in your father's chair, okay, and I'm starting to feel like, oh my God, what did I do?
Yeah,
I think today's going to be a 2-drink day.
Maybe.
Oh, that's great. And you don't want to disappoint the President of the United States, the guy that sort of appointed you, right?
No.
You've got to be loyal. That's fantastic stories. So so you broke one way, you're saying, I got to get out of here. Yeah. After being in the middle of all this. And yet your brother went the other way. But it sounds like your brother didn't go the other way right away. About reconciliation in this book that he wrote about your relationship with your mom. Where did he go and what brought him back?
Well, I think that when he went to University of Virginia, he became very interested in writing, the craft of writing, which is partially an analysis of the human character, and he became interested in history. So naturally, with those backgrounds, he did what everybody with that background would do. He immediately applied to become an investment banker. And his girlfriend got a job as an investment banker. He didn't, but he wanted to go to New York. And the only job that he could get was working as a secretary, essentially, at Time magazine. And he worked, and then he, did good research, and he was a good writer. And he ended up getting to work on a story about the BCCI bank scandal. And he ended up working his way into becoming a reporter for Time magazine. Mm-hmm. And through that process, it was very much where he reconnected to my mother, who had been a struggling person in a man's world where they didn't have women as journalists, and he had to climb his way up. And the combination of the craft of writing itself and of studying the human character, those things are just his passions. And he's one of the best. If you look up, they talk about Dickersonian questions. He never does gotcha questions, but he asks very difficult, seemingly innocent but difficult questions. Like, one of his most famous one was to George Bush. He said, Mr. President, you said when you owned the Texas Rangers, the worst decision you ever made was trading Sammy Sosa. In your, first year as president of the United States, what what mistakes have you made and what have you learned from them? And Bush was like stumbling. He said, I wish somebody had given me that question in advance. But anyway, my brother.
That's a tough one. That's a good one. And it is. It's a great question. It's honest. It should be able to be answered. But I really got to think about it, right?
Yeah. And he doesn't. I think, part of the reason he doesn't do Face the Nation or those things day to day anymore is because it was kind of exhausting and everybody was just spinning, and he doesn't like to play gotcha. We were, brought the news people, the politicians or the actors or the business people, they're the ones doing. Reporters are there to illuminate and report. They are not part of the story. And that's not the way the news is today.
It's
as
funny,
Chris Cuomo shows.
One of the people I watch is Mike Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the name of his?
60 Minutes.
No, not Mike Wallace. Who's
Chris Wallace?
Chris Wallace. Yeah.
His son.
When he does his Sunday show. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I do is I try to watch some of these people to see how to become a better interviewer, right? How does Chris do in representing me as an audience member, right? And how does he sort of build that bridge to these people and get the truth, get the question answered? And I feel sorry for him. He asks these questions. I don't care if it's for Republicans or Democrats. He
Exactly.
asks these questions and he doesn't get an answer. And it's an important question. So he'll press very lightly a second time. And then if they don't answer it, he goes to the next question. And I was like,
Yeah.
how could you do that day in, day out? That would drive me nuts. I'm like, come on, Mike. I asked you this. Answer the question. Don't go off on whatever you want people to hear. You know?
Yep. And if my brother were on with us right now, he would say, you are calling out my pain. And yeah.
That's something. So he wound up getting into the same occupation as your mother because at the heart of hearts, he was a writer.
Yeah.
Okay, I love what you said, an analysis of the human character, which is a wonderful way to say about writing. And so he then reconnects with your mom in that regard
Yeah.
because they connected at the same pain level, right? And then sort of built from there, and he kind of followed her, which I think
Yeah.
that's a fantastic story. But what about you? You went the other way. You
Yeah.
said, I'm out of here.
Yeah, because
What was it that just kind of got to your point? You said, I have to get out of here.
I think probably a couple of things. I mean, like every growing adolescent, I wanted to do my own thing, and I wanted to, do it on my own and do it my way. And so, I went to school in California. I had never been to California before in my life, but it was 3,000 miles away from home, and the pictures on the brochure looked nice. And so I was like, okay, that sounds like a good place to go. I'll go there. And it was like get away. And then
didn't you have your parents on the other hand saying, look, you do realize, Mike, and I know you realize this because you were at home during these parties. We know everybody. I mean, everybody.
Yeah.
This is like the center of the universe for opportunity.
Yeah.
And you're going to go where?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did they have that talk with you? Or did they cut you loose?
They were going through their trouble, so that was part of it. They, and the I do have one story that is completely politically incorrect. My godmother, may she rest in peace, called up my mother, and she was, Nancy, you cannot let him go to California. You cannot let him go. And my mom said, why? My mom didn't want me to go to California either. But she's, they have lesbian weddings on the beaches out there? Of all the reasons not to go. Now, my dad, who was...
But that's the number one reason.
That was it.
That was it. Yeah, right.
Lesbian weddings on the beaches.
And your mother said, oh, yeah, but that's L.A.
Yeah.
He's not going to L.A.
San Francisco was the heart of that. But my dad turned it around and said, well, I think that means the odds are better for you or something, and, whatever. And that's a funny story. But no, my parents, they were supportive. The real, they would give their opinion, but it was my deal to do. And, the first company I started, actually, the place where I spent more of my career than even PGI, my first company I started in college, it was called College Concepts, and it was an apparel company that.
What was your undergraduate degree and postgraduate? I sort of said it. You had an MA as a master's. So what were your degrees in? What did you pursue when you leave this craziness that in the middle of the you were in the middle of the universe, and then you go to Stanford? What does a guy like you who's got the brains to get in and all that? What do you study? What do you say I want to be?
So this is an embarrassing admission. I started off wanting to be a petroleum engineer and a chemical engineer because the world was going to run out of oil.
Okay.
And then when I got to California, in 1981, Japan had just passed the United States as the biggest producer of random access memory. and there was silicon is going to be the new oil. So I decided I wanted to be an electrical engineer and a computer science major. And the humiliating part of the story, my roommate was a fantastic electrical engineer and designed the chipsets for the iPhone, the early iPhones. The humiliating part of the story was that the engineers out there, the electrical engineers, were just a hell of a lot smarter than I was, number one. Number two, I had advanced placement credits. They used to let you do that. They don't anymore. And I had, for some reason, ended up going to Harvard for a summer semester because I'd had an operation and couldn't do anything else. So I went to school over. So I started with a bunch of credits, and I looked at it and I said, I can get 2 undergraduate degrees and a master's in 4 years. And my parents were going through times, and so money was an issue.
Yeah.
And I can get 2 undergrad degrees and a master's if I do history and international relations, and then I got my master's in trade policy, U.S.-Japanese competition in the semiconductor industry. So I went back and I took electrical engineering classes, but I took them as a graduate student, and I could take them pass-fail because I was not good enough to be a true engineer. So my college friends,
Were you a valedictorian of your high school class?
No, I had a couple of kids in my high school class that were just geniuses, absolute geniuses. I was up there.
You had to be up there. So
yeah,
and that's always wondered about somebody that gets into these, either the Ivy League schools or Stanford like this, is to say, how do you recognize, you said they were so much smarter than I was. How do you recognize that as someone going there thinking, I'm really smart? Okay.
So a couple things. First of all, disclaimer, Stanford was not as tough to get into then as it is now. Clear fact. Second, the way I'll answer your question is I played baseball, and I pitch, and I throw mid-80s, and I would see players, and I played for Stanford for all of 3 months before I got cut. I could see people that could throw mid-90s, and the difference between what they could do, I knew that I was good, but I knew that they were great. Well, when it comes to calculus, I could see, all right, I can do this proof, I get that, but I just saw somebody solve Bernoulli's inequality in the most imaginative, clever way that I can understand now that you've explained it to me, but I never would have thought of that. And so it's sort of that way. You're good enough to be able to appreciate somebody else's genius. And, that's kind of, that's my story really as a technologist. I'm good enough to understand the people that are really good, and I'm not one of them.
I'm good enough to appreciate someone else's genius.
Yeah.
That's a great way to describe it. Yeah, I did have a guy who talk about baseball. I had these 2 guys that, and I think I've talked about this on this podcast, but I had 2 guys that came to me looking for money at my office. This was back in the late 90s, .com, special days.
Oh, yeah.
And they were both the most beautiful men I ever saw. They were 6'3". They were twins. They were great. Okay. I mean, built good, looked good, everything. One of them went into sales. They both were like 30. One of them had gone into AAA, or went into the minor leagues, I should say. And and I said, when did you leave? He said, I quit last year. So he was in it for a long time. So what happened? He said, every day I practiced throwing, running, catching, okay, and batting every day. Okay. And he said, people would come into the league, come into the minors, and they would go like right past me.
Yeah.
To the majors. And I kept my hope up until one day I just said, I'll never be that good. I'll just never get there. And I never did. And that was it. And so you see it,
Yeah.
You see a Chipper Jones come in, right? And I just like, who can do that?
Yeah.
This kid's 18. He's standing in the batter's box. If I had half his confidence, I'd be a better hitter, right?
Yeah, that's it.
That is crazy, but it is true. I like that. I'm good enough to appreciate someone else's Is that what you said? Appreciate was the word?
To recognize somebody else's
Recognize.
genius and appreciate it. And that's as for anybody in the technology business, I remember you talk about the .com era, and as you may remember, I was for a couple of years the entrepreneur in residence and then managing director at eHatchery, and so I saw lots of stuff come in, and all there was one point where I was like trying to figure out, this shows how long ago the .com era was. Bluetooth was just coming out as a standard, and the question was whether Bluetooth was going to be adopted or not, and 802.11, and and I was like, okay, that's really interesting, but I need to understand this. And there were a series of other competing standards, and I was trying to understand that technology. And then there was internet security, distributed denial of service attacks, and I went to another venture capitalist in California. I said, I just can't learn this technology fast enough. And this guy who's been very, very, very successful to me said, Mike, you silly boy, you will never be able to keep up with the technology. It's not possible. However, you can learn what makes a great technologist. And there you can, if you know that's constant, and you can always go find them. So that, I don't know if that's true. It sounds wise, but it was a rationalization that kept me from going bonkers.
I think that is one of the greatest things I ever heard on one of these, because one of the things that I do is, as I have gotten older, I was all over the technology in my 30s, right? 20s, 30s.
Yeah.
Then as I got into my 40s and I started into my investment career, I kind of kept up with it, but I was losing it. By the time I was in my 50s, it was going rapidly. And then when I hit my 60s, I said, I'm really irrelevant. I don't even know what these people are talking about. But the one thing that makes me very relevant and continues is that I can spot successful entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
I just see them. I see them. They're business people. They do have technology background, some of them don't. But that they're just going to do it. You can put them, it's like the guy, throw him in the middle of New York City with nothing in his pocket.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
There's people, and they're few and far between. Or you see a lot of people who say I'm an entrepreneur, but then you see those that, like you say, a lot of people say, oh, I'm in technology. And then there are those guys. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That's really insightful. That's fantastic. So how did you, so then you went into investment banking because everybody else thought you should?
Well, I was going back and forth between two things. I was trying to work at Intel, and another company called DataQuest that was like a market analyst firm that focused on the semiconductor industry. I was jacked up about gallium arsenide chips. But Intel was offering $21,000 a year back then. And the investment banks, and I ultimately went to work for Kidder Peabody, were offering $30,000 base salary plus bonus back then. And that was a lot of money. And I was like, okay. And I had this business that we'd started in college. And if you're in the corporate finance side of investment banking, you're going to work 80 hours a week. You're going to work all night anyway. And they were the one company that would let me keep my startup going. We had a company, the company was called College Concepts.
Probably laughed about it. Oh, yeah, you could keep it going.
Yeah. And they let me keep it going. And my partner, the guy the second baseman on my high school baseball team, who was a fantastic sales guy, we started this company with money that I'd made selling hamburgers at Stanford. And we had this idea of putting college logos on men's boxer shorts. And we had just started this in March of '85. When I graduated was when we first started doing this, and the product took off, and we didn't know a damn thing.
By the way, for all those that are younger, that was a very unique idea to have any imprints on boxer shorts back then. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now there's imprints on everything, right? Okay. So people are probably saying, it's just Mike guy,
Yeah.
UGA print on my boxer shorts. Sure, I got a lot of those.
Yeah. And so that he worked at an ad agency, and at ad agencies they took 2-hour lunches, so he could come back to my apartment, and we used our apartment in my apartment in New York City as a warehouse sometimes, and he would do stuff during lunch, and then I would come home after 8 o'clock because Kidder paid for your dinner if you worked past 8 and your car home. So I was like, I need money for our business, so I'm just going to work late and get dinner. And I would work from 8 o'clock till midnight on, various things. And ultimately, after a year, this business, was, we passed the $1 million mark, and I was,
But he was selling to the distribution channel.
We sold our first sale
There was
was
no
to
internet. This is mid '80s. Okay.
the first sale was to Georgetown Tees, a T-shirt shop in Georgetown. We'd grown up in DC. We figured if we got stuck with this inventory that we'd invested $5,000 in, we could sell it on the streets ourselves. The next was the Georgetown University shop.
I love the plan B.
Yeah. And we also, no internet, but we had the Library of Congress. We went to the Library of Congress and got every yellow page. We went to every school that had a big football team and a big endowment. And we would look up the bookstores and the sporting goods stores in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in South Bend, Indiana. And we had a rank from who was the first school that we wanted to get to, because this was a capital intensive business. You had to buy fabric and have it printed and then make it. The smallest production run was 3,600 pair of boxer shorts, and so it was very capital intensive.
How much did that cost back then for the 3,600 pair?
It was about $15,000.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, man. Especially when you're making 30.
Yep. And there's an interesting, we got super lucky, and the way that we financed the business. With manufacturers financed it for us basically.
Yeah.
And because they had some,
I was going to say, what's the payment terms? That's going to be critical.
Well, the tricky thing was, Charlie, once we started to get some success, and we had success, like the first 24 shorts we gave to Georgetown Tees, they sold out in under 24 hours. Later on, we had stories. The 13th school we went to was University of Florida, and we sent 24 dozen, which I think is 576. And Linda Coleman, she was the buyer at the Florida bookstore, and some girl came in and bought every one of them off the shelf for $7.95. That's what they sold for at retail. And she went out in front of the post office at University of Florida and sold them for $25. And she sold out of all 576 in an afternoon.
Oh my God.
So the thing that we
she probably sold them as one size fits all.
The thing that we had to do is we had to figure out, because it was, there was some upfront costs. You had to do these engravings, which were $300 a color. You had to buy 3,000 yards of fabric. You had to do the printing, and then you had to cut these things into, cut and sew them. And this was a lot of capital. And we got lucky. There was a company that did our printing, Clearwater Finishing, that had a plant that was going to be shut down for the month of June. And what they did is they said, look, we have extra fabric and we think we could unload this inventory if you guys go out of business. So we'll tell you what, we will charge you higher rate, but we're going to print everything you need during the month of June, and we'll hold it. We'll pay for it all. And every time you take some fabric out, you can take 1,000 yards at a time. We'll charge you then, and you've got to pay us then. And then we had a manufacturing plant in Dayton, Tennessee, home of the Scopes monkey trial, Robinson Manufacturing. And they said, Mike, we'll do a deal with you. We will cut the fabric and turn it into shorts, and we'll hold that inventory for you. When you ship it to your customers, we'll charge you at that time. So between the two of them,
Why did they do? What were these? Your ideas or their ideas?
Combination. But they, to be fair, I'd like to think I'm pretty good at finance. I wouldn't have come up with them on their own. The guys in the fabric business had a problem that it was going to cost them a lot of money to shut down their plant for the month,
I got
and this allowed them to basically, make their P&L look good, and they're essentially putting their profit in inventory that they're holding, and that's just a trick you can play if you're in the manufacturing business. And the other guys, the Robinson Manufacturing, who did the cut and sew, they had a similar arrangement with another company on a different thing. So they were, and they were run by a brilliant guy who's passed away, but who knew how to use cash like a weapon. And this was his way of getting our business. There was somebody else competing for our business. He got it. But between these two guys, we were able to grow this into, a 20-some million dollar business with a grand total of $20,000 of capital. And this was a super capital intensive business. We got it to a $20 million business.
And then when this young lady who bought you out down at University of Florida and sold your goods for almost 4x,
a
3x retail it was, right?
Yeah.
Full retail price. Did that change your pricing model at retail?
No, it didn't. We had, we didn't have control of the retail pricing.
Okay.
But, we, what we did learn is we went out and said, what price do t-shirts sell at? And because there was no comparable product, and we said, we want to get at that price. What price, what margin do retailers need to get? And there was difference between JCPenney or Foot Locker's retailers and bookstores retailers. And so we backed into things and said, therefore our cost has to be this. And then we worked with our manufacturers to get that. And that's a very different way. And a lot of people work that way, but many go and say, what does it cost me and how much profit do I want to make? And then here's my price. A much better way to do this, and we do this in the software business too, is what will people pay? And then engineer to make your profit and hit that number. And I learned that in the retail business.
I think that's very important. And that is good. And the retail business, it's defined, right? That's what's it. There isn't this, this is a different product, so you should expect to make less margin here. And it's like, well, we don't carry that, right? I mean, they just shut you off and it'll be the end of it. This is the way we do things.
Yeah. And I had a buyer at JCPenney back when they were a big buyer who explained to me, and this is, my wife she still works for that company. I'm no longer involved, but she's the number 2 person there, and she deals with all the manufacturing and their biggest customers like Walmart. And here's what they will say. They will say, if we have this product at $12.95, we will sell X of them. If we can get a product in this category for $9.95, we will sell 10X. And they will discuss whether you should have 4 pockets or 2 pockets in order to get the price down to $9.95, because everybody makes more money. And that's a great way to figure out, a great model. Figure out what your customer can pay. And yes, you got to look at competition, but start with what your customer can pay, what value you're giving to them, and then engineer backwards. So that's one of the things I took away. I'm in the SaaS business now. So what does apparel manufacturing have to do?
So what can they pay?
What can they pay?
And then what's the second one?
The second one is this. It's the concept of the whole product. And my at the company in Dayton, Tennessee, Robinson Manufacturing, Jack Robinson, who passed away a couple of years ago, me once. He said, Mike, you think your product is that boxer short? That is not your product. That is part of your product. Your product is the boxer short, the label that goes inside it, the hang tag, the price tag on it, the package it goes in, and the box that it's shipped to the retailer. That is your product. That is the whole product. And you think about companies like Apple that think about the whole experience, from how you open the package to whatever. Yeah. That was what he taught me that the whole product was. So I'll talk to our product managers in the software business, and I have a woman that I worked with for a long time, and we would have this debate all the time. I'm like, that you guys are responsible for the whole product, not just the code and the button that you push, but the way it's installed, the user training, that whole thing, that is the whole product. And I learned that from the retail business.
So what was the third piece then? So you say, what can they pay? Focus on the whole product. That's
It was two. I really had two.
eliminate
It
a
was,
profit, and then well, you said like to get the profitability and all, they get the finances right or the economic model right. I had to eliminate a pocket or cut out a zipper or whatever,
yeah.
And then and then the third was
It was really two. It was two. It
it's
was
just the two. Okay.
engineer backwards from the price that your customer is going to be happy to pay. And the second is the whole product is a lot more than just the software that you're making. It is the installation experience. It's the training. It's the support. That is the whole thing that they're buying from you. And don't they are all
Almost
part
like
of the whole
saying that
product.
you view products as a total experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to just a thing, right?
Yeah.
It's an experience.
If you look at when you buy an iPhone, or I just bought some Apple AirTags to use to track some of our stuff, and the experience is great. It comes in a box. I open it up. It tells me what to do. It was beautifully designed, and in under 2 minutes, I had one. I know you're not supposed to use this, but I used it. We put it on our dog's collar because now we track our dog wherever he goes. But it was just such a great experience. And Apple is certainly one of the leaders at how to make that experience great. Tesla does a great job. They build a great car, but the whole experience of how you buy it, how you service it, how you get upgraded is just, it's that whole product concept.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So one thing that you kind of talked about here, that a lot of people wonder and how to address, because it's a very popular issue right now, which is, oh yeah, everybody should have a side hustle, right? So here you go to work for Kidder. Is that true? Versus, I mean, that's I hear it a lot.
Yeah, I hear that.
But my
I don't
question
know.
around it is really more whether we don't need to argue this one, whether it's there or it's not there, is you had one. I mean, you had this business
Yeah,
before you went to work for Kidder. Your partner or your second baseman, as you call them, he had this. He
he
had
had a real job.
this before he went into that marketing firm, right? That he went to work for in New York. So you sit there and you say, so I've got this thing that's taking my mind share. So how much of while you were working for Kidder, how much of your mind share was taken with the underwear with the logos on it versus the work you were doing for Kidder?
Well, Kidder Peabody certainly got their work out of me. In my year there, I had 9 nights that I worked all night, around the clock. That's what M&A deals. They're still like that.
Yeah.
My first day on the job, I came home, was watching Monday Night Football, and I got a call. There's Brown Foreman is looking at buying Irish Distillers Group. We need you to come back in and crunch these numbers. My very first day on the job was all night. So I'm pretty confident that Kidder got their money out of me. What gave was I slept 3 hours a day. That was it, and that is not sustainable. But and my startup business, to be honest, Charlie, I thought it was gonna look good on a business school application, because the guidebook that I got when I graduated said you need to go, if you're not going to go into engineering at Intel, you need to go work for an investment bank or a management consulting firm in one of their analyst programs for 2 years. Then you need to go to business school. Then you'll make a lot of money. And so I thought my startup business would look good on my business school application. And after a year of doing investment banking, which was interesting, but I really wanted to build something, and I took a leave of absence. You talk about my parents involved in my college decision. My mom was apoplectic. She didn't. I was independent at that point, but she was like, "What are you doing? You're leaving this great job of investment banking to sell underwear." And my mom and I had a little bit tensious relationship, and I said, "Yeah, I've just gone from kissing asses to covering them." And that ended that conversation.
Well, your poor mom, here she is. He's rubbing
That poor
shoulders with
woman.
all these influential people. And they say, so what's your son do? Oh, he sells underwear.
That was her biggest thing. My poor mother used to say when I would be completely disrespectful and horrific, as lots of like many children are. She would say, Michael, people pay to hear me speak, and I'm like, I can't help it that there are idiots in the world.
Oh my God. And then you became a father. That's how it works.
And I am humbled.
I say to my kids, as you sow, so shall ye reap,
Oh, that's so true. That's so true. That is so true.
So how long did you keep this business going? You said it got to $20 million.
Yeah.
And what happened,
Yeah. So in 1991, we had started a second line of business. I mean, we had our trademark originally was these repeat pattern prints, and it grew. The business grew, and it got up to, let's say, $9 million, and a lot of notoriety. There were plenty of neat things that happened, and I was like, okay, we're going to expand, and we're going to start making sportswear, sweatshirts, things like that with college logos on them. We had pro logos by this time, pro licenses and all of that kind of stuff. And so we ended up with trying to do an acquisition that went, a partnership that then went sideways. That ended up we ended up acquiring the company, and we were importing for the first time, making product.
Wow. And you're working it full time now, right? I mean,
yeah. So I was now doing it full time. I'd left investment banking. I took a leave of absence and ultimately made it permanent. But we started this business, and we were selling the stuff like crazy, and importing. And so you needed lots of capital. You had to open letters of credit and all of this. But good, we were making lots of profit, and all of a sudden we had a bad quarter. And I mean, not bad. We just made less money than we made the previous quarter. And I was like, wait a minute, our sales went up, but we made less money. How did this happen? And ultimately, this was the beginning of my education in cost accounting, in manufacturing cost accounting. And we had these assumptions about these goods that we were bringing in imported, and we were decorating. We were doing some light manufacturing in the States. In California, where we acquired this company. I was still in New York, and I was like, oh crap, we're losing money on every one of this items in this new line of business. Our old business, built on boxer shorts and repeat pattern prints, is going gangbusters and has great margins. This new business, which is heavily financed based on bank borrowings against our inventory and receivables, is losing money. Every item we sell, we're losing money on. And so I was in this awful position where, and by the way, back then, for you software entrepreneurs, you never had to deal with this stuff. I personally guaranteed $7.6 million worth of bank debt. And the only assets I had were my clothes, a set of golf clubs that I won in a raffle, and a Ford Taurus, and my stock. I had nothing else. And I had $7.6 million that I was personally guaranteed. And everybody can say, yeah, well, if you went bankrupt, there's money, and but that would have really sucked. And so I had, if you think about it, two businesses. And what we do is I push the one profitable business and generate as much cash as I could. And then we would slowly bleed out and sell some of the other stuff to cover so I would have enough profit to cover the losses and still stay in compliance with all of our bank debt. And ultimately, it was pretty stressful, and that led to me selling half of the business to our manufacturer in Tennessee, and that's what brought me to Atlanta. I had said, I've been in New York when the inventory and the money was tied up in California, and that was bad. I don't want to be that far away from the checkbook. I didn't want to live in Dayton, Tennessee. A lot of friends there, but I didn't want to live there. And so I moved to Atlanta. That's what brought me to Atlanta in 1991.
How did you when you valued the business back then?
Yeah,
it wasn't a multiple. It probably wasn't a multiple of revenue.
Oh, it was not a multiple of revenue. It was based on profit. And the thing about that business is you're only as good as your next season. There's no, I mean, one of the beauties of the subscription model is there's some predictability to it. So it was more art than science at the time,
Yeah.
and there was a value set because there had been other bidders. That's the truth. And I sold half the business then, and then I sold the other half in 1998. And the technology
How'd you
connection.
get out from all that 7 million in personal debt guaranteed?
When we sold the business, we went to a different, new financing arrangement with the acquirer,
I got
and
okay.
we had a great deal that if we paid down the acquisition debt faster, there was a bigger payout, and we paid it down. They thought it was going to take 2 years, and we paid it down in 9 months. Things were going well then, so that was good. But
Why'd you sell the second half?
yeah, I was going through some stuff in my own life. One was I was going through a divorce, and for
Mm.
all of you startup people out there, and I know, Charlie, you probably talked to folks about this. Startup is a blood sport. The dirty secret is you're doing 5 years worth of work in 1 year, and it may be for total nothing. And
Mm.
I was the working round the clock and focused on my business and not focused on my other life. And I've made one of I actually, when I got married the first time, I was getting pressure to get married. We should get married, and I said, look, I don't want to get married. Then finally I
Is
said,
she from New
look,
York?
Chicago, close
Yeah.
enough.
Okay.
I said, okay, just as long as you know my work is number one, my friends are number two, and you're number three, if you're okay with that. Now, that sounded logical to 26-year-old Mike. That is the dumbest thing ever. And if somebody ever said that to my son or my daughter, I would say, don't run away from that idiot. So anyway, that was, I decided that I
What
wanted
did
to,
she
I
say?
needed,
She said yes?
yeah.
Well, what a surprise how that ended up.
Yeah. Well, and for the people who said that, I was like, hey guys, look, why didn't somebody speak up a little bit more before that? Anyway,
Where was
it
your
was it.
mother in all this?
Oh, on paper, this match looked really good. There was another Stanford graduate.
Didn't she get a little deeper though? No? Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, Washington is a high. This is there's a lot of social fluffery, and I've been married for 23 years now to somebody who's like salt of the earth, and I got it right.
Okay.
But the thing, Charlie, the thing that made that company successful, thing that would sort of manage the inventory and keep it undecorated as long as possible. And then we also we did everything via telemarketing at first, because we knew the stores. We knew there's only the Cornhusker Corner in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Garnet and Gold in Tallahassee. We knew who we were targeting. We didn't have to send people there, and we built software that was a CRM software. We
Yeah.
actually modified some code that came from a computer distributor for that purpose, and we rebuilt. So our software business is really what made our apparel business successful. And I said, I want to go back into the technology business. So after I sold that, I went to work with, for Jeff Levy, and went to work, at eHatchery, and got back into the venture business, and then, Vocalocity after that.
Wow. So you were in the eHatchery was in Atlanta. It was the most famous
Yeah.
of those incubators, which was a new concept back in those days. Okay. That was a sort of build it for sale kind of company. That's the only way that those incubators were making money. And of course, since there wasn't any sustainability,
Yeah.
it didn't have a future, because everybody thought everything would flip in 12 to 18 months. And then after a while,
And then the bubble burst, and people realized that cash actually matters.
Right. Which
And you
seems to
don't
have
raise on a multiple. Back then, Charlie, and you may remember this, it wasn't, you can't hear
great.
me.
You're making some
Okay.
point. You make that point about back then is the way that companies would be valued was they would be valued
Based on burn, not
based on
yeah,
burn.
how much money you
How
were
much
losing.
money that you would be burning each month, right?
Oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those were the days when we what we did is we focused on eyeballs, right? That was during the .com. How many eyeballs can you get? It was a land grab. Spend as much money as you can raise. You know, that's what it was all about.
Yeah.
It's crazy
Yeah.
times. So when you got out of that, you decided when that sort of folded up, eHatchery sort of went away, is you got into your own business.
Yeah. What we did at the end of eHatchery,
And it wasn't the underwear business. Now you're a
no, it was.
technology guy.
Well, the way that I got into eHatchery was the underwear business because their second investment was called Fig Leaves, and coincidentally,
Oh, that's right. I remember that one.
I
Okay.
was about to greenlight back at College Concepts a $750,000 e-commerce site. Back then, it's just funny to think about how horrific they were, and some the guys from Venture X, if you remember them, came and said, "Hey, you should be an advisor to this company, Fig Leaves." And I thought, wow, for sure. And I said, hell, I'll write a $25,000 check because it's a lot less expensive to learn on their nickel than on whatever. And they invited me down to some meeting at eHatchery, and I met Jeff Levy. And I said, by the way, I'm selling this business, and we got to know each other. And he said, hey, incubators need an entrepreneur in residence. Will you do that? And so I did that. And then later on, as things got trickier, .com boom, he said, would you be managing director? And we went through a period at the end of that where I said, look, the people that are coming into eHatchery are frankly the worst entrepreneurs. They are the people who can't raise money elsewhere, and what we're giving them is not the great value. So what we could do, given that the capital markets are shut down, is take advantage of our resources, and let's pick a couple of areas and let's truly incubate our own companies. And so one of the areas that we had been incubating around network was around there were two things that were coming out. One was speech recognition, and then the second was around software for telephony. Instead of hardware and circuits, there were packets and software. And there was, just like if you think about XML that we use and HTML that we use, markup languages to make
Yeah.
websites, there was this thing called Voice XML, which was a markup language to write IVR applications, and particularly ones that use speech recognition. And so we started a company called Vocalocity. And so Jeff Haney and I ultimately spun that out of eHatchery. And that was like, I said to Jeff, I said, look, I've been working on this on eHatchery's time, so eHatchery should have a little piece of it. And Jeff was a great board member, and Jeff Levy, and Jeff Haney and I started Vocalocity, and that was kind of, we wound down eHatchery, closed out a couple of our investments, and I went from eHatchery to running Vocalocity.
Yeah, you had a lot of investors in eHatchery too. I think Jeff Levy pulled a lot of people in. Whatever, did that just they just wrote it all off? That was it.
They wrote it all off, and the thing that was amazing was I think the last round of financing that was done, and this was right as I was joining, was a Series C round that was done at a $55 million post, and a lot
Or
of folks
eHatchery.
for eHatchery,
Yeah.
and which at the time had like three investments: a vet, WebMD for animals, Vet Exchange. It had Fig Leaves, the underwear deal, and it had a little piece of eTour, which was a neat company that Roger Barnett had started.
Yeah.
And we were working on others at the time. Not 2 months later, there was an offer to buy eHatchery for double that, for $110 million from Idea Labs. And the existing investors and the investment bankers that were hired at the time said, no, that's too low. And then
Was
some
it
of
a
those,
cash deal or just stock?
oh yeah, oh yeah,
Cash.
yeah.
Oh, Because they were
But
famous
this,
stock deals back then, where everybody was just trading
yeah,
paper, but there was no
the
value.
wampum, wampum. Yeah. No, this was
Wampum.
when Idea Lab had just raised $1 billion on a $9 billion valuation, the highest ever. And I remember John Imlay say, John Imlay, who was one of the not only great investors in Atlanta startup history, but was great to Vocalocity, and he's just a fantastic guy. I remember him saying to Jeff Levy, "Jeff, we didn't get into this for a double. We got into eHatchery for a much bigger outcome." Yeah, that was then. Those were the days.
I remember there was when I got into when I was thinking about getting into the investment business, and a precursor to that was I got out of corporate, and then what I was going to do is I was going to invest in some businesses, invest in a business, and then run the business. Typical,
Yeah,
executive sort of coming on board. And I talked to Howard Morrison. Do you remember him?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So he was the guy that was leading the
HO
technology
Systems.
practice,
H-
right? For really for what's the bank? I just Citizen
SunTrust.
CNS. It was
Yeah,
CNS
yeah.
Bank. That's
CNS.
who it was.
Yeah,
Yeah, and which became Bank of America. But he said to me, he said, I just want to tell you, I've been around this sector for a long time. This is early '90s. And he said to me, I have seen so many companies that have these entrepreneurs build great companies. They get a cash offer to get out, and they say it's not enough, only to see the thing level off and then start going down in value. He says, I've seen that so many times, and here you are telling me the story once again. Okay.
yeah,
And by the way, I have my own story on that. I had somebody come in and
yeah.
was going to buy this services company from us for like $15 million cash. Okay. 2 years later, zero. Okay. We worth zero. We just shuttered the company in 2 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Passed on a deal like that. It's just, we all, those stories are around. Okay. But then, we really don't have time to investigate this whole PGI sort of experience that you had. But when we talked the last time, I do want to get these last couple of minutes just on your ideas. You said there were about all around execution. You almost had a
Yeah.
playbook for it. What is it?
Yeah, and this is really where my passion is today, is around building a great company that is an example of what opportunity can be, and it's built on a couple of principles, and that this is something that's been a career informing, but there are a couple of things that have come out, in my last tour, ClickDimensions, and I've been there since January of 2017.
But it seems
That
like
were,
this is almost like you've come to this after this 25-year
yeah,
career of operations. Yeah.
yeah,
This is a
and
distillation of all your beliefs, if you will, and your operating principles.
yeah, I came out of PGI, where I was working with the largest companies on the planet. I ran the global business, and Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, SAP, Apple, those were our customers. And I got to see how the really big companies work. When you're involved in their conferencing and collaboration business, you really get to understand how they work. And I took the opportunity to sort of study them. And then I got the chance, the folks at AKKR, after we took PGI private, I, I left and went to a company owned by Excel KKR. And it was a chance to take something at that time which had outgrown the shoebox. It was doing maybe 17 million in revenue, and expand it globally and so on. And there are a couple of things that I really have developed and refined during this time.
Mm-hmm.
And they start with a couple of principles. One borrowed entirely from Patrick Lencioni and a few others, but it's about building around a healthy operational company. And a lot of people think you have to be McKinsey smart and Harvard Business School strategy and all of this, but a healthy operation company beats the smart company. The best is to be a little bit of both. And there are four simple, in Lencioni's book, it's called The Advantage, and he's written a bunch of others that are all like parables and things like this. And he has this one book called The Advantage where he said, all right, I'm just going to make the recipe really simple. And he says, this is going to sound simple, and most people think that this is too simple, it can't be true. But he said there are four things that make a healthy company. And this is for a little bit beyond the startup stage for sure, but it goes all the way on up to as big gets. Number one, you have to have a cohesive executive team, and it has to operate as a team, and that their membership on that executive team is part of being the first team. It's not the United Nations with one group representing engineering, one group representing sales, one group representing finance. They are a team, and you own your results as a team. That's number one. Number two is that you need to create clarity around 6 questions.
By the way, I just want to dispel that one thing, the one notion about this doesn't work for startups. Startups, one of the things I say is the first step in a startup is product market fit. The second step in building a startup is a cohesive executive team. If you don't have that, you can't grow it. Okay.
So I 100%
so
agree with that.
So it does apply. I didn't want people to shut off that are listening to this thing. So what's the second? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head is the product market fit. Once you got product market fit, then it does apply. Because if you don't have product market fit, then you should shut the thing down and move on.
Right.
So the second, the second thing is create clarity around 6 questions, and as an executive team, create that clarity. And those questions are, why do we exist? How do we behave? What do we do? How will we succeed in the market? What's most important right now, and who does what? And if you get those 6 things right at an executive level, then the third thing you need to do is communicate that clarity around those 6 things. And if you can get everybody in the company to give the same 6 answers and be bought in, then you get alignment of efforts. And the final thing is reinforce that clarity through compensation and other practices.
Yeah, right.
So those 4 disciplines were super helpful. Then there's a set of things on the people side, and I add to that, and that is Simon Sinek's start with why. People want to know that they're part of something better, and why are they here? And that applies both to the people inside your company and outside.
Yeah.
And there's a set of other things on the people side: radical candor, being super transparent, and then the third sort of leg of the stool is the sort of the execution discipline. And these are all things, the 4 disciplines of a healthy organization, the people part of the business, and then the numbers part of the business, which is your KPIs and OKRs. I'm a big fan of objectives and key results that keep everybody aligned. And those 3 things sort of work together to make an effective organization. And if you do it right, the people in the company all understand how the work that they do ties to the greater purpose of the company. And if you do it right, your purpose is something that attracts people to you,
right,
and allows some people to say, you know what, that purpose sounds nice, but it's not for me. And if you've got all of these things working together, your 4 disciplines, your people part, and your sort of operational governance, you can build a virtuous sort of system. So that's come back and check in with me in a couple of years.
What was the first one? You said you had people and you had operational governance. Okay, and what was
the first one? Is those 4 disciplines of creating clarity, or of executive leadership team.
Oh, creating clarity. Okay.
Yeah, it's Lencioni's 4 disciplines.
I got it. Creating clarity. Okay. People and the operational governance. I got it. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. It's funny. There's a entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur out of New York that I'm friends with. He's done 30. He just turned 30. He's brilliant. He wrote a book, but he made a comment about if you can't convince people to join your team because you have such a strong purpose, right? How will you ever sell your product? I thought that was really great.
And for your entrepreneurs out there, there's one of the investors in Vocalocity, and one of the fantastic venture capitalists, super successful, very humble guy, but just great. I was asking him once, and I said, his name's Jim White, and I asked him, I said, well, how do you guys pick who you invest in when you're doing early stage companies? And he said, we look at the CEO. And I'm thinking they invested in us, and I'm trying not to blush or whatever. And I said, okay, well, what do you look at in a CEO? And he said, there are a couple of things that we look at. One of them is, can they play the chessboard? Do they know how to think of where the market's going, the commercial market, the investor market? Can they play the chessboard? Do they have high integrity? Can we trust them? And will they be open with their challenges early enough so that we can help? And will they be good stewards of our money? But he said, ultimately, we're looking for people who can sell. And I took back and I said, sell? We were in technology business, and sell? And he said, yeah. He said, every CEO needs to be a great salesperson in an early stage company. And here's why. And you just hit the nail on the head. Number one, you have to attract people. You have to make them believe that leaving their good job or their security to come join your crazy idea is worth doing. So you got to be able to, the first thing you have to do is be able to get people to join your band. The second thing you have to do is you are the ultimate salesman for your first couple of customers. If you're a startup company and you got nothing and no track record, they want to see the CEO. You got to be able to close the deal. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing is, eventually you're going to have to raise money or sell the company. So you got to be able to sell equity. So yeah, you may be great at physics or computer science, but you better be a good salesperson.
I'm 100% on that. I always get it to where I get people who say to me, the first thing I'm going to do is hire a sales guy. And I'm like, no, you need to sell. Well, I'm not a good salesman. Well, if you can't sell it, nobody can, okay? That's the way it is. And salespeople, I call them guided missiles. You got to know. I always say to them, I said, you got to answer 3 questions for a sales guy. And they say, what are those? They're like, who do I sell to? What do I say? How much does it cost? If you can't answer those 3 questions, you don't have a strategy, okay? So, Mike, this has been a delight. And I'm sorry that this thing ran over, and I'm sorry for the little glitches that we had in here, but we got this last bit recorded too. So we'll put it all together, and it'll be a good podcast. But, man, I think getting into your background, like that early part of life and all that, that was just priceless. And there's so many lessons to be learned in that. So thank Charlie, you for sharing with me.
It was great to be with you. It was fun to think about some things I haven't thought about in a long time, and I appreciate you giving me the chance to do that. It's great to be with you.
Well, I know you got to run, so I'll let you go, and then I'll just close this out. All right? Thank you.
Take care.
Okay. Bye. So there you have it. That was the Charlie Paparelli Show with Mike Dickerson, and he did a great job. We did have a couple of glitches in there, but hopefully it's still powerful. We closed with a lot of his how do you build a healthy company. So thank you for joining. Please subscribe at paparelli.com. Just give your email, and we will send you reminders that these great interviews and great blogs are on their way. Take care. Thanks for joining me.